Welcome to the Execution Revolution podcast, Breathwork. I've been speaking about my breathwork practice on multiple podcasts already, so I thought it'd be a great idea to have my breathwork coach on. His name is Gary Fabbri, and breathwork to me is one of those practices that's super effective in terms of getting me into my conscious state as quickly as possible, getting me into contact with my emotions and centering me for the coming week. So if you haven't tried it, I encourage you to listen to this episode and decide yourself. Enjoy. Gary, welcome.
Thank you.
You're my breathwork coach. What is breathwork and how does that kind of make an impact into a leader's life, do you think?
You know, there's one bodily activity that we have control over, and that's our breath. I mean, maybe some like super yogi or something can control their heartbeat directly or something, but most of us can't control any of those kind of internal functions, but the breath we can.
Yeah.
And when we control the breath, we work with our nervous system. And so by working with the breath, we increase the amount of oxygen in our body, we work with the nervous system, and we can alter how we feel through breathing. We know this from the relaxation side with activities like box breathing that the Navy SEALs are doing and all these kind of like very, let's say, people who are in stressful situations are practicing. But then also on the other side where we want to increase energy or we want to have deep connection or relaxation. So the breath is right at the center of that. And on top of that, if you think of it physiologically, you're taking the breath in, the whole world that's around you into your body, right to the center of your being, right here, right? And then you're breathing out again. So you actually are taking the world around you in a way also that you don't do with anything else. There's nothing else that's so intimate as the breath in terms of how you interact with the world around you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting as well how kind of the Western world of science is approaching more and more the more Eastern spiritual world. And I think breathwork is one of those things that has really kind of made it big into like there's actual like Western science around that as well. What does that say, the science of it?
I think the science itself is saying that basically you can alter your the amount of oxygen, of course, that's a very obvious thing. But then also the way that you work with your nervous system is affected a lot. And so the science is actually backing up the idea that, yeah, you can calm yourself by taking a nice, long, slow, deep breath. It's beautiful, right? Or you can also activate yourself by doing these kind of, rapid paced things. So the science is backing up the activity. Yeah, I think
It feels like breathwork is kind of a broad subject. Can you kind of categorize the different parts of breathwork?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about like breathing itself, you have like the Wim Hof kind of group, then you have the yogic pranayama, then you have this holotropic breath work that was brought in from people like Stanislav Grof in the early, turn of the century kind of thing, where they were working with how do we create experiences through the breath. So there are these different areas, and all these areas are basically intertwined.
Okay.
Right. There's only three things we can do with our breath, or four things if you want to think of it like that. We can breathe in, inhale.
Yeah.
We can hold on the inhale. We can breathe out, and we can hold with no breath. Ultimately, that's it, right? And then it's different durations, different speeds, and all that kind of stuff. So it's a very simple and ancient technology that's been developed and thought through over time. But ultimately, that's all we're doing, right? So then it's how do we work with that, and how do we work with how we feel? What kind of intentions do we set as we go into it? So like if you look at, for instance, the Wim Hof stuff, right? He's like, you could be a more powerful individual. You can go in the ice bath. So it's like breathe 30 breaths and you could do more push-ups. Yeah, because you're just getting your energy up. The oxygen is increased in your body, and then you have a little bit more capacity to continue to perform.
But his formats are a little bit shorter as well, right?
Exactly, yeah. So often they're these like 30 breaths and then do some activity like hop into water or whatever it might be. And then also then maybe calm your breath when you're in the water. So it's like big, deep breaths, and it helps you to deal with the stress that's coming from the coldness, right?
And then on the opposite end, you have the longer formats. And how long are they typically?
So a holotropic breathwork session could be around an hour or even 2 hours long. And that's where you're breathing just consistently in a way like through the mouth usually to increase the amount of oxygen exchange. Typically, when we're working with breathing as let's say a function, we want to breathe through the nose as much as possible. And there are all kinds of scientific things. There's this guy called James Nestor who's written this book recently called Breathe. And he's a journalist, and he talks to different breathwork experts about, what's best physiologically. And we know that breathing through the nose has physiological benefits. So in general, if you're going to like walk around breathing, just breathing through the nose, even when it becomes a little intense, is quite good for us. And there are, athletes right now who are working with that as well as they're training. So they're trying to increase their breathing through the nose breathing, and elongate the breath while they're performing.
Yeah, and I've heard about like the taping of the mouth overnight as well.
Yeah, that also helps with snoring, right?
Okay, I've heard about it from more the kind of athlete's perspective, and powerlifters and so forth.
Yeah,
definitely that helps.
Yeah, they're saying that helps because you're working with the breath in a better way. It's the best way to breathe for your physiology.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. So I've found you in the kind of longer format stuff.
Yeah.
To me, usually I go on Sunday evenings. To me, it's an awesome like reset for the week, or almost, you talked about setting an intention going into the breath work. For me, it's almost like setting the intention going into the week. So I find it very difficult typically to kind of find those longer moments of reflection. And it's kind of interesting because I'm not really actively reflecting that much during the breathwork session.
No.
It's kind of interesting. You have something to do compared to normal meditation. I think we just talked about it before the show, that when you're just meditating, it's so easy to kind of get wrapped up in your own head and start thinking, and the mind is starting to wander. But during breathwork, it's like you're always kind of focusing on something, but that also unlocks some kind of unconscious level of thinking that's very valuable to me. Is that the reason most people come, do you think, to longer format stuff, or is it super individualistic?
I think that people are really affected emotionally.
Yeah.
And so, there's a kind of like a long form meditative activity that you're working with, and you can you can think like that, and then maybe you don't have a specific idea, but that some things can come up during the session. But most of it is, they say that we, every molecule in our body has a kind of memory, right? And it's like all intertwined. And when we get into the breath, and especially when we elongate the breath and have a long session, we give ourselves time to both like land, and step away from thoughts, because we're breathing, constantly focusing on that breath, but then also activate the emotional body so things start to come out.
They really do.
Yeah.
Do you know the reason why they do?
I don't really know the reason, other than that I know that we're working with igniting the nervous system. And then the nervous system, of course, is talking and triggering to the brain, right? And so then the brain is then activated through the breath. So in this sense, that's it. But I don't know if there's any other kind of, function that's happening.
Because it's interesting. In the room, usually we're around, 15, 20, 25 people.
Yeah.
There are really moments of people being very, very emotional. But at least to me, that like you're so much in your own bubble that it's kind of zoned out in a bit. It doesn't really, at least, face me. And sometimes it can kind of be useful as well. Like having other people going through stuff when you're kind of stuck in something when you're in your head, just hearing, like, because emotions is one of those things that we don't really allow, especially like this audience is so much leadership audience. Like emotions is almost something that you're taught not to display. And what's interesting with you, by the way, is you're not just a kind of spiritual Sherpa. You started your career in the kind of commercial world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your kind of road and how come you found breathwork and this whole alternative universe.
Yeah. So I've been in like the TV and media industry for a long time. I was a creative director in London. I worked first for NBC and CNBC. And then I went on to work for Fox Kids and Disney and did a lot of branding and that kind of thing. And then I moved to Sweden quite a few years ago, and I I worked for an agency as a creative director and
Yeah.
making films and all kind of stuff like that. And at some point during those years when I guess my children were small, I started to sort of think a lot about like, well, am I, in touch with who I am? And
Mm.
I've always had a little interest in like let's say poetry and
Mm.
spirituality in some way. I kind of studied religion. At one point, I thought I'd be a priest when I was like,
All
17
right.
years
Yeah.
old, that
Do
kind
you
of
come
stuff.
from a spiritual home?
Not really. Maybe, I was raised in the US
Yeah.
and there was like, we're going to go to church every Sunday.
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd call it spiritual. It's more like
Yeah.
community,
Mm-hmm.
so,
Yeah.
and we also got a lot of benefits in terms of like going to like, retreat things when we're kids and stuff that the church would kind of organize.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
so that was a kind of a good thing in that sense. But then when I sort of discovered, especially breath work, I was like, this helps me to come deeper, to connect more,
Yeah.
and then to align more with what I want to do. Because I felt like professionally, I was offering a lot in terms of like for clients and stuff like that, but I didn't feel like I was kind of sharing the whole of myself, right? And I thought, how can I work a little bit more with who I am to then share more of what I feel or see in the world? And
Yeah.
so that's why I started to do like, teach breath work,
Mm.
to work with like leadership teams and people that want to come a little bit deeper and make more of more alignment with who they are. So when they behave, there's like less stress, more excitement, more engagement because you're more aligned with your own internal values and
Yeah,
everything like
absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like the clarity part of it as well.
that.
That to me is probably at the epicenter of what I'm kind of getting out of breath work. Like you're stepping away from that kind of stressful mask wearing sometimes life and then getting into the emotional state, but then utilizing that to become more thoughtful, authentic, bringing more of myself. I think I'm on the kind of same journey. So what happened then in your life? So you had that spark. Did you go like balls deep into breath work all of a sudden or?
Kind of, yeah. Like, so I thought, okay, so I had kind of a few, like, maybe it was like a crisis time. I was like, the kids were small. I was kind of breaking up with the boy's mom at that time. And I was like, I need something, and then I was working as a creative director. So I was like, all the stuff is all happening at the same time. And I'm like, oh, I need something. And then I started having these like, visions or my, dreams or whatever. And then I thought, where do I go?
Yeah.
The old Christian Catholic church wasn't really the place. I did like jujitsu and, martial arts and all that kind of stuff, but that's a lot of the, let's say the spiritual side that you get in like Karate Kid, that's not really present. It's more like just like boom, crushing each other, which is fun, but wasn't where I need what I needed. And then I thought, oh, yoga. So I went into a yoga studio and I just decided that I'm going to like see what's there. And it's so all of a sudden, you're challenged because you have to relax.
Yeah.
You have to do this restorative stuff and all this kind of yin thing where you just like lying there looking after yourself, but also other people looking after you.
Yeah.
And I was like, I hate this, but I need it.
Yeah.
And then I found breath work in that context, and then started going deeper and deeper over, 10, 15 years. And then I thought, oh, I could, help other people with this. So then I started teaching it.
How much of that is your world now? Because you do other stuff as well besides breathwork.
Yeah. So breath work is only, I only teach that really 2 days a week. I have a breathwork class that you come to quite often, that Sunday night thing. And then I have a one class on Mondays. That in general, and then if I do corporate work, sometimes I almost always incorporate some kind of breathing, usually not a whole breathwork session, but some kind of breathing to align and to connect and then move ahead with whatever it is that we're going to work with that day.
I think one of the things that I've had a discussion on previously on the podcast is that we all have a tendency to produce really bad meetings. And I think part of that perhaps could be like if you were really intentional and perhaps did some lighter form of breath work at the start of a meeting, you could probably improve the outcomes of the meeting quite a lot, getting that reflective state in.
Yeah, definitely. What happens is when we start to breathe in just a conscious way, elongate the breath and slow down the breathing, slow down the voice. I mean, we automatically start to step away from that fight or flight mechanism and into this kind of, they call it liminal brain, right?
Okay.
And that is more of a communicative space. And then even if we go deeper into the kind of neocortex and that kind of area, and there are studies that show this, like as you breathe and meditate, your brain is ignited more.
And how would you recommend, so say that I run 20 meetings a week,
Mm.
how would you recommend using breath consciously to improve the quality of the meetings that I have?
Yeah. So I developed a series of these meditations. I call them meaningful success meditations, right?
Okay.
And it's really simple process. And I can tell you right now what it is.
Yeah.
It's regulate, reflect, and respond.
Okay.
Regulate, reflect, and respond. And regulation is simply this. So we could even do a short one now without
let's do it.
boring people. Okay. All we'll do is we'll just notice the breath. Breathe in and out. And as you breathe in, we're not going to meditate on the breath. We're not going to spend a long time. Just notice how it feels to breathe in and out. And now, as if it's the most natural thing in the world, just elongate and deepen the breath just by 10 or 15%. So just a little bit deeper and a little bit longer. A little bit deeper and a little bit longer. And what happens when we deepen and lengthen the breath, we're using the technology, the ancient technology of the breath, to tell the body that everything's fine. And the body talks to the mind says everything's fine. And the second part of this whole process is reflection. So that was regulation, just deepening and lengthening. And reflection is, how can we connect in the most possible positive way during our session today? Reflection. It could be any reflection point. How can we create a fantastic strategy over the next 2 hours? How can we contribute as being our best selves? How can we, whatever it might be, that's the topic of that particular session. So we're focusing. And then the third part is responding. When we're done with that little bit of reflection, let's respond. I had an idea during that 1.5 minute of reflection. This is what I'd like to share, or let's start the meeting, whatever it might be. And then with that refocusing, we're actually using the physiology of breathing to help us to align.
I think that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah.
It's weird that we're all kind of in this bubble where it feels like it's kind of you're sticking out of the crowd starting a meeting like that. It feels a little bit forced or something, but I do think it would provide tremendous value, especially in the meetings where you're actually dealing with something difficult.
Yeah.
And like finding that reflective atmosphere in a sense.
Yeah, there are plenty of techniques that don't involve, like, let's say something as kind of fluid or whatever as breathing. So for instance, you could do something we call it like release tension, set intention.
Okay.
So let's say that we're coming into a meeting, maybe it's only appropriate if there's like people that right? But you'd say, okay, I just had an argument with one of my kids. He's annoying me. Can I just release some tension so we can set our intention and have a good meeting today? And you'd be like, yeah, sure. Of course you would, right? And I say, the guy just pisses me off. He doesn't do what I want. He doesn't help out around the house, blah, blah, blah. Right? And you're like, all right, now we can go.
Yeah.
And just those kinds of like activities that help us to align with who we are and get rid of the crap that we don't want to take into the meeting can help us.
Yeah.
So there's probably, like a little box of tools that we can use just for these things.
We're all kind of ashamed of the emotions that we carry into meetings or whatever meeting. It doesn't even have to be a professional meeting. Like I find myself so many times still carrying stuff from the last meeting into the new meeting and not being conscious about like kind of switching the context. And I would really like to experiment with being more deliberate in kind of giving myself at least 2 minutes of doing, because it's quite quick. What we did now, that was like a minute.
Yeah.
And it's really impactful. And I do think probably people listening to it probably followed along as well. Like
Mm,
you could really feel the difference in such a
mm.
short amount of time. Do you do this like is it just natural, instinctual for you by this point to really use your breath to kind of regulate emotions or?
Definitely. Whenever I feel like, oh, I feel a stress, I will make an active choice. And I think I've learned and taught myself to do that. So I'll just be
Mm,
like, and you
mm,
just feel the tingling, the
mm,
goosebumps come and you're just like, oh, here I am. I'm
yeah.
back.
Do you have a practice that you could do? One of the things that happens to me, and I guess a lot of people, when you have these kind of meeting days where it's just back to back to back, you have it. I find it difficult to focus after a while.
Mm.
Do you have something that's more like a focus intention setting that you could do with the breath?
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that, people like Tony Robbins are always kind
Yeah,
of, espousing these kind of things, but you can do like a little shakeout, where you just like, you're breathing, this kind of like, that kind of, rapid
yeah,
fire breath and shaking your body. Because there's, the animals in the wild release trauma from the body when they shake, right?
yeah, yeah,
So if you're just shake out yourself and do big breaths like that, all of a sudden you'd be so surprised at what an effect that can
mm,
have. And it takes 25 seconds, 30
yeah,
seconds. As you probably, yeah, maybe you know it, but I run these like ultra marathons sometimes, right?
okay,
And I go kind of slow and everything. But when you feel like you're just like everything is just like, because you're running for like maybe 100 kilometers or
mm.
something, everything is just like coming in on you, right? And if you just give yourself this kind of like shake out breath thing, all of a sudden you have like renewed energy.
Yeah,
So physiologically 100% works. You can go in the bathroom and do it.
yeah,
And then you between sessions and you're just like, okay, I'm ready.
yeah,
You know, those things definitely work. And there's nothing wrong or embarrassing about doing it.
yeah.
Obviously, if you're leading a whole group and people are walking by, it's different than if you just do it yourself to get
Mm.
yourself going.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so great advice.
Yeah.
I'm going to take that with me to the week because to me, breathwork has been kind of the sacred zone at Sundays,
Mm,
setting a broader intention for life. But you can be
yeah.
so much more kind of micro conscious about it.
Yeah. I think that, the breath, one of the things that I'm trying to work on now and communicate a lot is this idea of, alignment with who we are and what we want to do.
Mm,
Because there's so many things that you can do,
yeah,
right? You get up
absolutely.
early. We talked about that in the
Yeah,
beginning before we started, right? You get up at 5 a.m. and then you got all this kind of, you're doing your push-ups and your gratitude journal
yeah,
and your yoga pass and then your, whatever. And then finally you're making breakfast for kids and then you're out the door and
mm,
this kind of stuff. And like, how do we know what to put in place?
yeah. It's super difficult.
Yeah, we just could follow somebody else's like list, and we love that. Like, if someone says, "Do this, do that,
Hmm.
take these supplements,"
Yeah.
it's like Huberman or whoever, or Rich Roll saying all this kind of stuff. And then the question is, well, what from this big list do we need?
Mm,
You know, and I think the just letting ourselves focus on who we are and what we need and want is the most important thing. And if you think of mindfulness, nothing is more like of a micro habit than being mindful.
mm,
Just being really here, present right now at this moment. And we do that through letting ourselves just see,
yeah.
you know.
What is mindfulness for the people who've never tried it?
Mindfulness is being as present as possible with whatever we're doing.
Mm,
I mean, it's that simple. And so when you come into a meeting after another meeting and maybe it was a tough talk or whatever, and then all of a sudden you're sitting here with me, and if you were sitting there thinking about whatever it was just before, we're not really fully present.
yeah.
And many of us who are very active, we suffer from this
Yeah,
because
for
there's
sure.
loads of things that are carrying over.
Mm,
And that's okay. There's nothing like wrong with that. The thing is we know from experience that those times when we're really as present as possible,
mm,
better things happen,
yeah, they
right?
do.
And so we want to find techniques or whatever that can help us to do that.
One of the things that I struggle with mindfulness, I used to use Headspace,
Hmm.
the app. I think it was really good, especially the founder has a fantastic voice.
Welcome back.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
Andy.
I'm Andy. Yeah,
Yeah.
got a fantastic voice. But it's almost like putting a just like it just treats the surface level symptom in a way. And I think what's really interesting with breathwork is how kind of deep you can get quickly. But I do think that mindfulness is very useful, especially dealing with like short-term stress.
Yeah.
But what you're talking about now, which I find is really interesting, is the idea of being mindfully present.
Yeah.
I think I've been thinking about it more as a kind of stress management tool to kind of just almost like self-care a bit, but not necessarily with the intent of being like hyper present in the moment. Because obviously I completely agree with you. Like everything's better when you're there. But I really struggle with that concept, especially like with the pace of life, you know?
Yeah. A lot of people make you think that, oh, like, you're walking along the road like some monk or something, and it's not really, I mean, it's not meant to be like that. The pictures that we have are like that. But it's not like that. It's more like someone that enters into the flow state, right? That's really engaged in whatever they're doing. I like to think that, like when you have a workshop, right? Everyone is like on their best behavior. They're in there, they're playing with their Post-its and they're whatever, drawing pictures, whatever they're doing there, right? And you're like, why can't our whole like business lives be like we're in a workshop? Because we're more of ourselves, we're more present, we're more engaged. And we should be like that all the time. And if we need a little bit of time to refocus so we can go in like that, then
there's so many concepts that are kind of connecting to this as well. I think one of the things in workshops that we don't really think about it is that it's actually very playful in nature within a workshop, but we're so kind of serious in all of the other facets of especially the professional life. But I don't think we think consciously about the value of play. Because play, what's interesting in when kids are playing, they're kind of collectively responsible for carrying the play through in a sense, but it's in a very playful nature and not like that deadly serious all of the time.
Yeah.
So I think there's so much you could refocus in your kind of work environment to make it a lot more enjoyable, but also more productive. But how do you know, like coming back to it, how do you know what things that you should kind of fit into your schedule that carries value versus the things that is just ends up becoming one more thing on the to-do list that is like getting mindfulness in can be a stressor in itself?
It's interesting because at the core, so I think exactly that. Let's say we looked at all this stuff that we're going to do, right?
Yeah.
And we just take away all the protocols. We don't think about getting up at 5 and all that kind of stuff, all the habits, right? All the habits just go. And we just are. We just breathe. We listen to ourselves. Notice how we feel. And then we start to put things in place when we feel more aligned with ourselves. Maybe we do it in a playful way with someone else who we kind of like, let's say, respect or know that can offer something. And then you start to say, oh yeah, well, what if, I don't know, let's say it's doing push-ups in the morning or something, let's say we're going to do that. Okay, well, how do we make that playful? How do we make that interesting? What things do we need to do? I don't like to write my journal every day. I want to do a voice, whatever, and if they come from a place of alignment, they're going to be better.
I usually find like when I think about like the process, I usually do a lot of that in like two extremes. Either when I'm in very high levels of alignment, I've just come back from some retreat or something like that, or I do it from a perspective of completely everything is falling around me and I need drastic change. I don't think that much about my process when everything is kind of okay, but it's probably from that point that you should like refocus more often, like make smaller iterative changes from a place of reflection.
I think that it's all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It would be nice to see, like, obviously, like there's when we're in, let's say, panic mode, right? It may be hard to think about things, but actually, strangely, most of us who are, especially like, let's say, high performing people who would be interested in your podcast or whatever, they're good in stress, right? Because they're dealing with everything directly, right? And that is a point of mindfulness. That is a point of like real concentration. The bus is coming towards you, right? And you are just ready to deal, right? at that moment, you're like at your best because you're most focused. It's when all these other admin things and whatever it might be that comes into life and all that kind of thing, that's when it becomes like, oh,
Yeah.
right? So we like the stress because the stress, of course, raises our dopamine levels, gets us kind of even in that sense, but it also um, makes us more acutely aware of what's happening.
More aliveness in a sense, more present.
Yeah. And so if we can find that presence even in the more mundane things,
Yeah.
you know, there's a saying like, before enlightenment, fetch water and chop wood, and after enlightenment, fetch water and chop wood. It's like the everyday things can also be filled with a kind of beauty,
Yeah.
And it doesn't always have to be stress related focus. It could be just being focused, and both are equally, let's say, mindful. Yeah.
Is a big part of being mindful doing one thing at a time.
So this idea of multitasking is different from being present.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, I think you could be a multitasker because they say that you're really only doing one thing at a time anyway, in a sense, but you're just doing micro doses of that.
Yeah.
And I think if you're very mindful of what you're doing, even if it's only in small chunks, it could happen. It might be very hard because you're constantly switching,
Yeah.
right? And the external impulses are kind of coming at you all the time.
Can we talk about like context switching for a while? Because that's one of the new things in my life that's been, I'm really trying to figure it out. So this actually comes from like AI. So I'm really deep into AI. And what I find right now happening is that something that would usually take me, say, 4 hours, like I really like deep focus. So I have always tried to kind of arrange my schedule in a way that I do like bigger blocks of focus work. Something that used to take me 4 hours now takes me between half an hour and an hour. That means that I context switch so much more in a day now. I do like deep work because I can go deep really quickly with AI. But then I have to focus switch between multiple deep things. And that to me is becoming a real stressor, or not stressor, but I find myself way more exhausted at the end of the days. Because I'm not in 2 buckets, I'm in 12, 15 buckets doing kind of deep cognitive work. Do you have a way to kind of deal with context switching?
Yeah. I think I'm a little bit like you in that I can go into one area than the next. And then I hear what you're saying with AI too, because a lot of like the process of thinking our way in is shortened.
Yeah.
Because the AI knows exactly what you're thinking because it's already has these kind of processes in place that are sitting behind it. And I think that spontaneously, we need to think less about being, let's say, productive in that sense, and more about like what really is important, and then what we really want to communicate. And remember that we are, at least right, still biological creatures that need to have this kind of cycle of, let's say, activity and rest. Right. AI doesn't need any rest. It's silicon-based intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens is where it's going to use us up rather than we using it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we want to switch the paradigm back to our intention, what we really want, because it will go forever. It will never tire, right? As long as there's electricity. Yeah. As long as you're working to put electricity into it, basically it will keep going. So what we need to do is think, okay, I get this far with the AI, and then I want to think, okay, well, what do I really want to communicate now? What's really coming from me instead of what's coming from the external genius of the AI?
Yeah, and I do think there's a lot of processes that we're still trying to figure out. It's like we have this new foundational technology. It's like it's the first time we have fire available, and then you try to put fire on everything, and like, yeah, fire is awesome in certain spaces, but you need zero fire in other spaces. And I've kind of approached AI specifically from the point of view of productivity, as you say. But then you go on this endless like road of being just more productive, producing more and more and more and more. And I think there's so many things in like really to figure out, like in a broader scheme of things, like for society, like how do we as leaders, for example, rig our teams so we get all of the benefits from AI and supercharging our teams and our organizations with AI, but making the experience fundamentally more human.
Mm.
And
I think we should really be thinking about how we really feel. I think we lose sight of that in terms of when we're trying to like create, be super productive.
Yeah.
And I think that, if you're miserable, then it's not working. Whatever it is. If you're miserable, then that's a sign to you that something's not correct. Like
but it's interesting because you're miserable in one sense, but you're also in that awesome flow state zone where you're like, because I love to create, like that's one of the core things in my life.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. And so like nobody's forcing me down the road of AI. I kind of voluntarily like, wow, wonder what happens if we do X, Y, and Z. And I just sit for hours and like experiment with it. And that's voluntary. But I do think that we need to think, again, as you said, way more consciously about this kind of cycle of like intense productivity and rest. And I think I haven't thought about the rest part enough because I've been so kind of intellectually interested in kind of the output side of things.
Yeah, and it never tires. It doesn't need that cycle. Maybe there's a different cycle that we don't know yet, right, with AI. But we have a cycle.
What's our cycle?
Well, I mean, we have to sleep.
Yeah.
We need sleep. It's not an option. If people don't sleep, then they die, right? So we know that. We breathe air in and out. We talked about the breath a lot. That's part of a whole cycle of living. We are aging. We have children that are growing. All these kind of things we're affected by the seasons.
Yeah.
AI, of course, it's still in its infancy, but it won't need those things. It will need different things, especially if it develops like super intelligence to the point of, AGI, whatever, right? So like that's happening. And that's if it's going to be healthily in parallel to us, then we need to find some biological ways to feel well, because we could easily get wrapped up into this kind of frenzy, which is not normal. Like you said, you try to put the fire on everything, right? In the beginning, we're all chaotic and trying everything that we can possibly do. And we want to, let's say for ourselves and our families, collect as much money from the AI, from using these tools and all this kind of stuff and create security and safety.
Yeah.
At some point, maybe that will all just totally shift. I think we're obviously, as well as I do, maybe even more, that we're in a super paradigm shift.
Yeah.
If this thing goes the way it could go, who knows where our, let's say, work lives and all that kind of stuff will end up.
Yeah.
So I think just be aware. We have to be aware of our biology and be respectful of that, and really, honor what it is that we want and how we feel.
Yeah. I think there's so much that is interesting in the whole, like if you make a big group of the world of like spiritualism and yoga and all of this kind of what we feel are the kind of alternate worlds, or at least we feel in kind of some type of mainstream society. Like there's so much value in the kind of reflecting on the things that you wouldn't normally do. Because everything has to be kind of rational and you only focus on the productivity side of things. But that conscious experience of like, what do I actually want? When you meet people, because you're connected to the yoga studio and Bara Bara and stuff like that, what do you feel is the biggest mindset shift that people go through when they start exploring this side of themselves? And what are the kind of typical steps that they go through?
So I think what happens is there's a general dissatisfaction. We recognize that the life that we kind of thought, the dream of whatever it might be, is not exactly the way that we're living.
Yeah.
And then we see that there are other alternatives out there. And we start to pursue them in different ways. a lot of people who start these kind of journeys, they immediately, like, let's say, break up with their partner, or they've broken up and they're trying to find a new, context. Maybe we could almost call it transition times. There's like transitions that we go through. And in the transitions, that's where this kind of stuff becomes bigger because we feel bad and we want to feel good. When we feel good, like you were saying about the practices, we tend to like let it go for a while, and then eventually we feel bad, and then we go back and try to do something else to fix it. So I think it's those times that when this kind of stuff comes in, people say, like, a lot of times, oh yeah, we don't like the church except for when we die, right? And then people go to church and they have the funeral and all this kind of stuff. It's not a thought you want to think about all the time, but it's when we lean on these things. And I think that if we, let's say, find our spiritual connection, which is really a representation of just connecting to ourselves and especially connecting to other people, like creating this kind of like community of connection with people, then I think that if we can maintain that, we'll probably be happier and better off through time.
I think that's really clear. I haven't visited all of the yoga studios, obviously, but at Urban where you teach, it's very rare as soon as you enter that place, like, it's clear that it's community and people care about each other. Like, at least to me, there's very few spaces that are like that. We're very unused to the idea of community. And you mentioned before, and I think it's so interesting, very few places are you cared for, especially in leadership positions. You're so used to kind of trying to care for somebody else, but like, who cares for you in a sense, and not even you do, perhaps. So that's super valuable as well. I know you taught my wife went through the yoga training or yoga teacher course with you guys. What's the kind of spiritual side of that education? Because I thought it would be way more like, this is the position, but whenever she came home, it was mostly like the philosophy of it that she was really interested in. What do you bring them through?
Yeah, so I teach the philosophy, and the breathing side is called pranayama in the yogic thing, and then the spiritual side in the philosophy, yoga philosophy. And it starts with this simple phrase. It's it's you are it. You're it.
Yeah.
Like a game of tag, like a game, right? You're it. And the whole premise is, if you know that you're it, and by it is like consciousness itself, that your consciousness is the consciousness.
Okay.
As soon as you know that, then you're, let's say, enlightened. And the problem is that we know it, but we don't know it. So if I say to you, you're it, and you're like, I feel like I'm it, but maybe, what about, and then you start asking questions. And it's answering those questions that we sort of go on this internal journey.
So what are the questions, for example?
The question is like, yeah, I feel like crap. How can I be it? Or my mind is filled with this clutter, and all this kind of negative talk and all this stuff. How can I be? How can I be it? And then it's like, okay, well, if I said to you, you are it 100%, and you knew it, right? But you don't know it.
Yeah.
Then how do you experience it? And so then the practices, maybe whether they're breath work or meditation or listening to sound healing or whatever, they're all trying to get us the experience for that moment. In the yoga world, we call it samadhi, this nirvana like state, right? Where you're just like, whoa, I'm it. And some of us have experienced that, if we've been involved in, anything from psychedelics to, meditation, or even if we're playing basketball or something, it's just like, whoa, everything's perfect, right? At that moment, you kind of know it. And then, you get onto your problem life or whatever. So in the yogic thing that I teach, it's all about that idea that you're it. Now, another thing that I could say about that is that most of our learning in the West is additive. So 2 + 2 is 4, 4 + 2 is 6, and on, right? And so on. We learn mathematics in literature and language. We construct sentences additively.
Yeah.
And we get better and better and better. With this yogic knowledge, we start at the end. You're it. And then all the questions, whatever path that gets you there is the path. Great physicists work this way. It's like, whatever, why is the sky blue? You don't start with like, 2 plus 2 and get to why is the sky blue. You start with those questions. The questions are what bring you closer. That's the excitement about the best mathematic minds. They're not just like, they're trying to figure out the solution because there's something that they want to create and or an answer to.
Yeah.
And that's the way it is with the yogic thing as well. So our educational system is kind of geared sort of incorrectly. I mean, there are some benefits to it, of course, too, that we gain certain knowledge, but basically we start with the end or the big question.
I think the questions part is so relevant as well. We talked about AI before, but I think one of the big things around AI, if you're going to have a benefit of it, is that it's so clear that you have to become a lot better of asking the right questions.
Yeah, the prompting.
The prompting.
Yeah.
And I do think so, like the last maybe 10, 15 years of like the working space, like questions in themselves haven't been that important because you just Google a question quickly. It's not a super conscious choice that you do in the kind of the questions phase. But that's why I feel that it's so rewardingly creative working with AI, because you have to become so much more conscious about the questions. And it's really, we've been going through in our company like an AI upskilling program the last couple of months. And it's so clear, like the ones that are struggling, they're struggling because they're forcing the questions phase. Like, what do I really want to achieve? Because you're used to, like, in the Google logic of things, you're used to asking a question and then you're just fed a bunch of stuff and then you start to read. So it's like, it's more, you don't start with that conscious of an idea. It's more like you find the kind of train of thought as you go. But in AI, I feel it's kind of the opposite. You have to know, what do I really want to achieve with this? And I think this is so interesting.
What are the top 3 questions that you've heard?
Well, you could go on answering that. You could either go on, one of the things that's been very surprising to me is how useful AI can be on the kind of existential stuff. I don't know, I've had it up on the pod before, but there's a couple of different prompts that you can run that asks it, because if you use AI a lot, it has a lot of data on you and can kind of understand your train of thoughts and what your priorities are and so forth. And asking it to kind of help you, almost like making a psychological analysis of your, and going really deep in that. And you can prompt it to get into, I want a shamanistic approach to this, or I want some other type of Jungian analysis or something like that. That can be very beneficial. And that was really surprising to me. I think when I'm really impressed by colleagues, for example, is when they think in completely new ways. Like we couldn't have done this thing, whatever, before, but now in the age of AI, we can. So one of the big things that we have on our kind of strategic forums right now is how will this actually impact our organizational design? So if everybody has 10, 20, 30 specialized agents around them, what does that actually mean? I had a super funny discussion with our CEO just 2 days ago, where he said, like, what maybe the future of an IT department is actually becoming more of an HR department, because they can be in charge of the agents that are deployed, and they are deployed more and more as humans, and almost like an HR department is like this HR business partner for the business, right? But now more and more of the business is becoming the kind of agents, and that kind of switches a lot of things. And how do you think about, like, growing almost always was synonymous with like increasing headcount, and there are new ways of growing and thinking about, like, how do we run this business? What should be automated? What shouldn't be automated? I had another guest on that had a great saying, like, if you think about the cognitive equivalent of a assembly line in a factory, like everything that you do, like, that is really repetitive, but the cognitive version of it, like, computers are just better at doing the kind of menial tasks around it. But there are a lot of things that aren't menial, and if we can put ourselves in those kind of work environments, that would probably be really enjoyable. But again, it requires consciousness because it's so easy to kind of just run full steam ahead and automate everything and not really think about what's the long game here. Where do I, like, what do I actually want my work environment to look like in 3 years once we've kind of automated everything that we should through AI?
Mm.
And I want to be, I think conscious switching is one of the things that I'm thinking about right now. Like, how do I make my days actually more enjoyable,
Mm.
more present? I do think like creative, the flow state, how do I optimize for that? How do I optimize for more human meetings? Like the podcast is one example of it, but
Mm.
like having these kind of deeper, almost existential discussions is something that I want more out of my everyday work.
Mm.
And then,
Yeah, it's interesting when you say that, because like a lot of times, like when I speak to you, I feel that I'm speaking to someone who's interested and informed and all this kind of stuff, because you are, right?
yeah,
You're interested in these kind of things. And because so much is available,
yeah,
so many podcasts
mm,
and, super intelligent people on, YouTube or wherever, or the AI communication thing, it can be easy for me to disregard people, to say, okay, I could go to listen to some boring person who doesn't really care about what they're doing, or I could listen to your podcast.
mm,
What am I going to do?
mm,
And that's a weird thing. So maybe what happens is those of us who want to have these kind of deeper conversations, we sort of switch the whole
yeah,
connection point with the
mm,
people that we want to connect with. And we form these pods of people who are really interested in stuff, and we
mm,
don't need to talk to or deal with other people. It's kind of
yeah,
strange, right? But
absolutely.
and that's a frightening thing too, right?
Mm. Yeah, because you're less exposed to ideas that aren't fitting into your worldview.
That too,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. We get this kind of bias of
yeah,
confirmation, or like, yeah, everything that we want, we go in that
yeah,
direction of, yeah,
absolutely.
and it's so much of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it goes back to the idea of kind of recentering to the emotional side. Again,
Mm.
back to breathwork. I do think so much of this historically for me has been driven by very rational ideas,
Mm.
and giving a space for the emotional side is, at least to me, it's been super difficult. Like obviously for me, it's been like 3 years of self-discovery and like pretty intense work,
Mm.
but it's so, and I wouldn't at all portray myself as having arrived anywhere
Yeah.
really, but
Yeah.
it's like it's a very valuable journey that I wouldn't regret. But it's like consciousness unlocks so many things in life. But it's very, like, how do you, especially for the people coming in like in the early stages of things, what do they typically struggle with as concepts?
The embarrassment side, right? Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think that, I don't know about concepts, but in terms of like how you feel, it's like, I'm being silly.
Yeah.
This isn't giving me anything, or this is like, these people are weird,
Mm,
uh, those are the first, that's, I think, the first barrier.
yeah.
Like, I don't do that. And yet, if we approach it from another point of view and just say, oh, imagine if you you know, just notice how you feel now. We do like a 1 or 2 minute thing, like we just did before in the beginning of our chat. How do you feel now? How do you feel after that?
Mm,
Oh, actually, I feel a little bit strange. I feel a little bit more calm, a little more connected, or whatever. Or maybe those are the wrong words. I just feel like I get easier to focus because I just did a little bit of breathing. That's it. I mean, there's nothing more like extreme or incredible or anything than that.
yeah.
Like sometimes I think that, or weird, right? So I think that sometimes the people that get hooked on in the, let's say, the yoga world or in the spiritual world, they are they represent the fringe of this,
Mm,
just like, and to be honest, just like the people who are in the kind of high performance physical world, they're at the fringe too. Like you and I are not David Goggins, right? He's just like an absurd character doing
mm,
this incredibly crazy stuff. And even people who are in the middle, who are also like Joe Rogan is like, that guy's crazy,
yeah.
so we're not crazy at either pole, right? So we don't have to go all in and have man bun. I wouldn't have a man bun anyway, but whatever. And like wear like, just weird clothes and go around to be spiritual
Mm.
or to be connected to this kind of thing. What we need to do is say, you know what, I feel better when I just take a few breaths and when I
Mm.
connect a little bit more, and it makes it easier for me to relate to my kids and to be, happier,
Yeah.
and to just lie there and have stones on my belly because it feels good, whatever,
Mm.
like those things. I think if we get through that, everyone will benefit from these kinds of practices.
Mm.
And maybe by normalizing them to put them into a way like, um, like let's say most of the health podcasters at the highest levels right now, the big people, right? They're saying, I meditate, I spend time doing this stuff because it benefits us all,
Mm.
And so I think that's what we need. We need just like, yeah, just take a breath, you know?
Can you help me with one of the things that I struggle with sometimes too in your class? I think I approach it too much of as a recipe. I know, like, sometimes I get into these incredibly almost psychedelic states of like altered mental reality. And I think I've been kind of like, it feels like that's when it's taking effect, So then the next time I go in and like feel that I want to get there, and then obviously it's completely impossible to get there, and then I feel like, okay, this time wasn't as worthwhile or something. But I kind of approach it like I want to perform in this thing that's intended to be a non-performative task, right? How could I approach this better, do you think?
There's this poet, T.S. Eliot, and he said in one of his poems, we had the experience but missed the meaning.
Mm.
And we all are looking for experiences.
Mm.
That's part of the fun thing of life, whether we're bungee jumping or paragliding or doing breath work, right? We're like, oh yeah, I got this psychedelic experience. That was so cool. And we can get hooked on, trying to find the next kick, the
Yeah.
next experience, right? And that's not the point, really. So that's where we maybe could think of it as like, how do we generally feel? What are we really after? And what helps us to like align with who we are, right? How do we decide, okay, I'm a person who's fit and healthy, who has a great like look, perspective on life, right? And that's most important to me. And so this helps me to sort of do that.
I think it's like the valuation of something. Like there's a judginess of like what's the quality of this meditation versus that meditation.
Yeah. Yeah, there is. I mean, and that's part of us as, we're comparing and stuff. So you don't want to say that's bad because it's not bad. Just like if you have a gym session and, you're tired and maybe you don't go to like, the point where you're going to build lots of muscles that day. Now, if you're like Arnold Schwarzenegger back in his day when he's trying to perform, he's going to go there,
Mm.
right? No matter what. We don't have to, right? For us, it's good enough that we go right to the gym and we do the stuff
Mm.
and it's good. We're not competitive bodybuilders. And in the same time, we're not going to be meditators who are meditating, 16 hours a day
Mm.
because we don't want to go there. But what we do know is that the benefits of de-stress, of being more aligned with who we are, of connecting to ourselves and to the people around us are improved by these practices.
Mm.
So we're going to incorporate them into our life. I think it's more like that. Now, I'm not saying I love this kind of like being extreme. I'm
Mm.
not saying we shouldn't be extreme if we want to be, but I think we should choose our areas and then use the other activities around us to help us in that way,
Mm.
right? So, obviously we're going to eat well. We're going to, train. We're going to meditate and do these kind of things. All these practices are leading us towards who we want to be.
Mm.
And then the question is, who do you want to be?
Mm.
What do you really want? We don't want to be an amalgamation of all these kinds of habits. What we want to be is decide what we want, what's the most important to us. What do we want to excel at? What do we want to share? And then let those activities feed that.
Mm.
And then we looked at, meditation is like, or breath work is a thing that can help us because, oh, I do feel more relaxed. And yeah, sometimes I have these incredible experiences and sometimes I just feel relaxed, but I know it's a practice that's good for me.
Mm.
Just like going to the gym or eating well or whatever,
Yeah. Not put, and maybe that's part of the, I'm not saying it's a huge problem, but it's something that I've been kind of frustrated with at times. But maybe that's kind of the because it's a little bit more new to me. I, I think I put so much emphasis on the kind of quality side of it,
Mm,
which I wouldn't do necessarily in like how did I eat today. It's
mm.
more like, yeah, it was a great day, or yeah, I could have done better. But it's like the overall trend I want to be in a healthy way, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you already have like, like the fitness side in, right? So,
Yeah.
so if you'd never been fit, or if you were like obese or something, then those first 3 weeks when you didn't eat ice cream would be like, whoa, I managed to accomplish this,
Yeah.
right? And that's like obviously a negative one because you're denying yourself. With these kind of practices, it's like a positive thing, but at the same time, you can't always have it and won't always have the experience of the breath,
Mm.
thing. And that should be okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
It's part of normalizing it. Do you think that there's something to be gained? We're not a very spiritual society. Do you think in our everyday leadership positions, whatever they might be, do you think that there's a space for spirituality in kind of the work environment, and what would that kind of look like and impact and so forth?
You know, for a while I was trying to keep everything separate, right? So I was like creative director, I had the yoga thing, I'm like an artist, right? And I kept everything compartmentalized and I
Mm.
thought, okay, yeah, this is the way. And it's only since I started to integrate and allow myself to integrate these things that things have opened in terms of my communicating with people like you and other things. So I feel that there is something in the integration that's super important. Now, does everyone have to have a spiritual bent or whatever? No. If someone doesn't want to be, as long as they feel well, then that's fine. I think that there's because of the extreme, right? There's a lot of people who are just weird,
Yeah.
and then we don't want to be weird,
Mm.
that weird, maybe, right? Um, but I really feel that if we call spiritual, that there's something bigger than us. There's something more interesting that maybe consciousness is kind of something that is like beyond our understanding.
Mm.
Um, there's like this. I thought about this recently because I was trying to think of like I'm trying to figure out how to articulate some of this in a book, and I thought, oh, there's like the power of now. What if we had like the power of wow,
Yeah.
right? Like this is amazing. If we could just appreciate that's a spiritual experience,
Mm.
right? Being in nature, whatever. If we have those moments, I
Mm.
think, yeah, every, you know, every business leader in general could appreciate or learn or grow from something like that. And I think in the end, like as time goes by and we look at, let's say, the company that we built, the most important thing isn't just like all this like legacy stuff. It's the connection we have with our family or
Mm.
to someone that we love. It doesn't have to necessarily be family or the way that we feel, what we've contributed, those are the big things, not what we've accumulated,
Mm.
you know.
Do you think that the power of wow is something that you have to kind of separate out and do on your kind of private time and bring in the feeling of wow into your work? Or is it something that you can kind of integrate even further into the work?
Just think, you walk into your workplace, right? And someone is just like, man, it's so good to see you.
Yeah.
What can we do today? This is just like gonna, like you're like, wow, I want to be here.
Yeah.
Someone that comes in and just really looks at you and gives you attention, and just says, we got a great day ahead of us. We're living like as if this is a workshop,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we should be all doing every
Yeah.
day. And we should be like not allowing that kind of leadership to continue because it should be fun. I mean, why do it all day long if we're not engaged? And
Yeah.
yeah, okay, fun isn't the right word. It should be rewarding. It
Mm.
should feel like yeah, engaged is a better word than fun, right?
Mm.
Fun is like maybe going to the Gröna Lund or
Mm.
something like, but like it's like we want to feel like, yeah, we're there, we're in it together, playing, you know.
Again, the concept of kind of being mindful and present in the moment.
Mm.
It kind of circles back to that in a sense.
Yeah, and being mindful and present doesn't mean being boring and quiet and
No,
all
no,
that.
no.
Exactly, right? So that's kind of the impression, right? It's like, oh, I'm very mindful.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's like, oh, look at this. This is such a cool cup, whatever,
Yeah.
right? Appreciating the things that are around us.
Yeah. What are the misconceptions do you feel around kind of the yogic world from people completely outside of it? Because there's kind of a clear divide, I feel. Like
Yeah.
people that are just feeling that's something kind of weird.
Yeah. All right. So the first is, I think the physical thing, right? Let's say there's, a lot more in general women who are doing
Mm.
it. So the men think, oh, I don't want to do yoga,
Yeah.
right? Then there's the whole thing about like flexibility,
Mm.
like um, it's a challenge for many men who are like maybe brought up playing football or something
Mm.
else where you get tight muscles and everything else, and you're going to go into yoga and do all that. So there's the physical side that's, I think, the biggest and first barrier. And in general, most yoga is the physical side.
Mm.
If you go to a yoga class, except for like that it smells good and that they play kind of like yogic music,
Yeah.
there's nothing yogic about it. And that's like a weird or anything like that, right? There's girls, they're playing music and it smells nice in the place, right?
Mm.
Then if you want to get into the spiritual side, that only happens when you come into like a teacher training or
Mm.
whatever, in general, right? Maybe some people say something like, connect to the breath and
Yeah.
feel nature around you or something. That's nice, right? But that's it. So there's a misconception there. And I think the physical side is a good thing for anyone, especially if you're stiff in your body
Mm.
we all know now with the movement of like, um, uh, being able to move our bodies well and stuff and being, functional movement kind of things. That's super important, right? We know that as time goes by, if our bodies are stiff and tight, we're not going to feel good. We're going to have back problems and all that kind of stuff. Yoga can help with all that because it works with flexibility and strength. But you could go to Aikido, whatever, or you could do different things. So I think the physical side first. Then it's the environment and allowing yourself, as we just discussed briefly, but allowing yourself to learn how to be quiet,
Mm.
like learn how to like let someone look after you.
Mm.
This whole restorative thing, you know, every time, and even now, and I've been doing yoga and all kinds of stuff for a long time, right? Even now, if I get signed up I sign myself up for a restorative class. I'm like, it's going to be a waste of time. It's like 2:00.
Mm.
I got so much to do. I don't want to go and sit and lie around, right? And I get there, get all the stuff together and all this kind of, and someone says, oh, just lie back and put your thing bolster this way and just lie on there. And you're like, and then 5 minutes later, you're just like,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Thank God. Yeah.
you need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that. That's the second thing is just learn how to relax. And then the third, or maybe you never get there, is all this kind of spiritual stuff.
Mm.
And I think you know, I think that people should only do that stuff if they're interested, to be honest. I think the other benefits are so big, stress reduction and physical side and all that, and focus, and is way more important for most people than, let's say, the spiritual side, or learning about, the Hindu gods and goddesses, or all that kind of stuff, or the idea that you're it, whatever.
I think one of the things that fascinated me, because my wife has been into yoga more as a training form for many, many years.
Yeah.
And to me, there was almost zero of the kind of spiritual side of things. But as kind of she grew into more of the spiritual side of things and opened up, she went through more different types of experiences. And one thing that really fascinated me is that this world is huge, and you have a tendency from the outside view to look at it as one thing, like a yoga class.
Yeah.
But there are so many ways to kind of, well, I'm not necessarily interested in the yoga flexibility classes myself. I don't appreciate that training form super much. But there are so many other things that I do love. Breathwork is one example, but there are other examples as well that I think we would be benefited by not just looking at it as one big thing.
Yeah.
And you have all of the, like, from the one end of being more like intimate together and the tantric side, and you have all of the kind of spiritual side, and there are so many things to explore.
Mm.
How would you kind of paint out the kind of this, like, what's available on the menu if you're looking to get into something but you don't really know what it is?
So if you're, let's say, all right, so if you're in your body and you feel like you're not feeling well,
Mm,
right? There's often a fear like, oh, I'll never be able to do yoga, right? For, let's say, a typical kind of business guy or whatever.
mm,
Um, and yoga, actually, if you went to a yoga session, people would be nice to you, right? So that's like step one. If you want the physical, a nice environment where people are nice to you, and then you can start to loosen up some of the tightness and stuff in your body. I
mm,
think that's like a great, entry point. I think that if you feel like you want to have a deeper connection with your partner, right? This whole kind of, you mentioned this tantric side, it's fantastic because the exercises that are part of that are to help you to sort of connect with one another at a deeper level where you actually spend time, appreciating. And the very simple thing is, just looking at another person in their eyes. That's like a very straightforward, simple tantric activity. And then it builds on that. It's not like all about sex, it's more about intimacy,
mm,
right, in general. Now, there's the tantric spiritual side, and that's using the senses to have spiritual experiences. In a sense, breath work could fit into that category because you're using your body, but you're not using your senses. So it would be like touching this glass and starting to really feel that and how it affects you and all that kind of stuff. Um, then, there's the psychological side when you do stuff like these deep retreats and group work,
yeah.
right? That you do at retreat centers, that those things are super helpful for the way that we connect with ourselves, but also with other people, and also see how the dynamics play out, right? So, for instance, we might feel that, in a group, in a boardroom or whatever, that, oh, that and this and that, but we're just kind of bullying our way through, and maybe another approach can help us, and we start to become aware of how we are in a group.
Mm.
So,
I
yeah,
think it's so beneficial in the longer format if you go away for a couple of days on retreats as well.
yeah.
To me, at least, my experience, I went to normal psychology like once every 2 weeks for an hour or something like that. Like, the progress that I could make in understanding myself and really finding myself over a 4-day retreat was almost more than a full year's worth of because you're so there. And I
Mm,
think there's something about, like, the slowing down of the pace. It's not like, yeah, we're just getting going and look at the time, it's see you in 2 weeks kind of thing, but
yeah.
really investing in that deeper level.
Mm,
And there are so many cool retreats in many different shapes and forms that are happening in just Sweden that I didn't even know about existed.
yeah. There's so much activity and so
Yeah,
many things because people really, when you go to a retreat, it's like a giant workshop for your
yeah,
soul and for your communication with other people and your psychology, like, yeah, how do I deal and work with other people?
yeah, exactly.
Super helpful. Yeah.
What are the bigger things that we haven't talked about today that you think that we should?
I think that, when we talk about like connection, I really do think that I think we could go into the idea that um, in every moment of every day, we could be our best selves, if we want to call it that, our most engaged selves. And I can imagine if we create the habits that help us to get there, to help us to have the kind of not just discussion that we have, not the topic that we're talking about, but the kind of interaction that we're having, that when we do that, we're understanding how other people are and how we can deal with them. It doesn't mean that we accept all kinds of behavior, but that we deal with things on a real level and that we don't try to like, push them aside.
Mm.
And if we deal with things on a real level and a true level, I think we'll come a lot further.
And normally there needs to be almost like a trauma trigger for most people to get into it, I feel.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, you were going through separation. Many people start treating their health differently after the first health scare.
Yeah.
And if we could be more proactive around this, I think it would be super beneficial.
Yeah.
But I think the reality is also that like trauma is happening all of the time. In a sense, we're just not noticing it. We're bulldogging it through, right?
Yeah. We're desensitized
Yeah,
as much as
exactly.
possible. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. What would be great, like if from the audience perspective, like, yeah, this sounds interesting. Like, where do I go?
Yeah, so I have a website with lots of stuff on there if you were interested in that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, have lots of meditations and all kinds of stuff. And then there's also, you know, your of course your local breathwork thing. They could either come to Urban Home for a breathwork session on Sundays if they were in Stockholm, or, you know, there are many other different places to go to.
Yeah.
I think, you know, when you mentioned there's lots of retreats, there's people, if you are quite wondering about this, you know, ask around. There'll be someone that you know that is going or has been on a retreat, and go on one, because they're going to be nice.
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing. Like, you get treated well no matter what. You might have to just eat vegetarian food for a week, but you'll get treated well, you know. And I think that allowing ourselves to be treated well is a good thing. And there are men's groups too, you know, people who are getting together talking about this stuff. It doesn't have to be all Burning Man, you know,
Yeah.
all this kind of like way out there thing. It can be, you know, a group of, you know, 4 or 5 people talking about books, whatever, or AI and how to make AI more playful and part of their lives. It could be anything. But we need those groups that, you know, to connect with each other at a high level.
What's been your experience? You mentioned men. I think there's a broader discussion. I know you follow a lot of American podcasts as well around masculinity in general. What's your view on kind of one, or let's do it like this. One thing that I've reflected on is that there are very few masculine role models that aren't portraying some type of like hyper masculinity, if that makes sense, or almost like the toxic side of things. But on the other hand, like going completely feminine in your masculine obviously doesn't seem to be the right choice either. What's your view on masculinity?
Yeah, that's a really important question. I have 2 late teens, right? And they've both been affected a lot by these kind of online, you know, dudes who are driving around in their Bugattis and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I feel that, you know, I try to get through to them and talk to them about how to be like a human being, and how to like live well and treat other people well. And the thing is if you're like, say, alarmist, if you're creating negativity, if you're like saying things that are outrageous, the algorithms unfortunately have been designed, you know better than me, but they're designed to like accentuate and promote that.
Yeah.
I do think we need more spokespeople or spokesmen for the men group who are masculine and strong and supportive and show the positive side of masculinity.
How would you describe the positive side of masculinity? And I'll say this before you do. I had an experience this summer driving up from our summer house with my wife, and she mentioned to me that she wanted the fall to be more of a thoughtful exploration of her feminine side, as separated from societal expectations on womanhood, and being really thoughtful in exploring what do I want my femininity to be. Then I asked her, what is femininity to you? And she went on for almost, I think, like 40 minutes, almost to an hour, and talking very positively about what the feminine side is. And I reflected on, I could probably go for 2 or 3 minutes describing the positive sides of the masculine traits. And to me, I think it's 2 things. One, we've had a fantastic kind of movement of equality between the sexes, but it's also come at a certain cost of talking very negatively about the masculine sides. Like the want to win, for example, is just portrayed as something very negative. So I started thinking about, like, what is really, how would you describe the masculine in a very positive way without portraying the masculine really as the feminine, like the caretaking things that wouldn't necessarily in my world fit into more of the masculine energy. How would you go about explaining the positive sides of masculinity?
I would definitely start with this feeling of spacious security, right? So
Okay.
there's an openness and a kind of like, I'm here,
Mm,
right? This safety, security thing.
mm,
The masculine energy provides this kind of openness for anything. It's like, here,
mm,
everything is fine, right? Then from there, there's loads of different things. I think if we think of like the positive masculine, it's providing, right? It's making sure that um, that you are doing things in a yeah, just way, a way that is like good for the whole, you
mm,
know. Um, Positive masculine, or there's a strength there, but it's not like an overpowering strength. You know, it's like someone that will be looking after you, the caretaker, but in the biggest possible sense.
mm,
You know, so the caretaker of the caretaker. If the feminine is like the caretaker of the emotional body, the masculine side is the caretaker of the whole. You know, it's like this whole thing is under my watch.
mm,
You know, and I am there to look after the whole thing.
mm.
The thing, let me see, what other things do you think that come up for you now that we're just sort of starting to mention? I'm trying to like um, think live, but like,
It's interesting. There's something around strength um, that is. You've heard the expression, better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And I think that to me is kind of the epicenter of the strength argument. Like I want to, because I feel that through society, I suppose, blame society, but I think strength has always been perceived as something dangerous.
mm,
So you got to train yourself to not display strength.
mm,
But then you're going into almost like the gardener in a war argument, because you're not being conscious about strength.
mm,
It's something that you disallow yourself. You're not experimenting with. And I know strength, whenever I'm in the most contact in the middle of a retreat or some spiritual kind of feeling, strength has a tendency to be really big in that.
mm,
Like I have this endless ability, almost like this gorilla energy that I have this immense power to protect or whatever. And then there's the conscious choice to use the power and the strength for good.
mm,
And I think there somewhere I find the masculine. Like I have the ability to inflict violence, let's say, but I would only do it in the order to protect.
mm,
Um, but I do think it's difficult. I like the idea of the protector of the protector in a sense. It's almost like that Will Smith movie. What was that called? Who Will Watch the Watchers?
oh yeah.
Maybe too niche of a. Um, but what else? I don't know. That's why I'm asking. Like, I think it's difficult to kind of nail down. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a certain kind of, you know, um, in our, let's say in our uh, current society, you know, there are some masculine traits that are provider, but that means also it has been, you know, the financial side, that you're considered, you know, that you're not flighty. So considered that you're like, you make decisions, you're
mm,
decisive,
yeah,
right? Decisiveness is a masculine trait that's
yeah,
extremely,
absolutely, yeah.
so you could say, let's go that direction.
But
You're,
what I struggle with is like, what's the I think a lot of men feel that I am worthy of love, for example, when I do something. It's very conditional
mm,
loving. And I think what's interesting when Hannah, my wife, talked about it is that all of the things that she was really looking into the feminine, are like traits that going back to what you said, like I just am. I don't get these traits as a consequence of me doing something specific. And that to me is a little bit what makes the masculine difficult, because it's easy to look at the provider of security, the provider of financial income, the provider of whatever it might be, but it's very transactional in a way. And I'm looking at like what's the level of masculinity underneath that, or maybe it's just that's what masculinity is. It's being providing.
Yeah, you know what's interesting is in the yogic philosophy, the divine masculine is consciousness, right?
Okay.
And all activity is feminine. So
All right.
the Shiva energy, there's this Shiva and Shakti. Shiva is this kind of direct, vast consciousness, always in meditation. The kind of the whole, supportive of the whole.
Yeah. And that's the masculine.
That's
side.
the masculine.
Okay.
So it's this just giant presence, right? In that giant presence is the divine feminine, and that is where everything is manifest. So where we want to, if we want something, we always go to the feminine. She is the provider. She is the side of the world that we interact with, right? And so in essence, to be really masculine is to be this kind of like divine consciousness, this open, expansive thing.
Is that something you can actively be? That seems almost a little bit more passive in a sense.
This is the strange thing, this idea of passivity and action. Yeah. And this is where we are when we get into these kind of questions about like presence, right? If we can be conscious, if we can be aware, if we can be in that moment when we are really truly connected as men or as women, but as masculine or feminine, then we are there. And then all the activity just flows because we're not trying to do things. We are things, right? We are this thing. And I think that that's basically one of those, you know, it's not like we have to be filled with activity to be in the masculine. It's more like, boom, we're there. You know, you picture like, you know, then you can find metaphors. Like you picture like the bodyguard or whatever, right? The person who's in the light is the female, and the bodyguard is this kind of, you know, presence behind, right? Just big and strong. And, you know, that's like the divine masculine energy. Now, our female energy is the one that's in there doing this kind of stuff, making things beautiful and creating things. All that, right, is the feminine energy. Yeah. But the masculine is the encapsulation of that, the kind of support for that, that lays the foundation, this kind of overwhelming, you know, openness and consciousness.
How do you deal with the concept of courage?
Courage.
Yeah. What does that mean to you?
It's interesting because, you know, I feel like it's hard to be courageous because, in a sense, you know, we are not facing most of the situations in our life right here, right now, that demand that much courage. You know, if you are in Gaza Strip or if you're in the Ukraine and you have to like face some of these terrible things that are going on, right? Then you're in a different position to talk about courage. I mean, you know, our decision is to complain about like, you know, whatever latte we have or something, you know, so I'd like to feel that given that moment when courage is demanded, that I would do what you know, something that was courageous. But I feel like the conditions are so rare that you actually have to step into courage in that sense, the way I see it. And certainly not in the business. It's all just, you know, the whole business thing, it's not courageous, you know, in general, because it's not really that much, like it's not life or death, you know? So when I think of courage, I think of life or death. And then that leads me into maybe living the best life I could live. In that sense, yeah, that's courage. Yeah. You know, to be as open and positive and receptive and as masculine and feminine at the same time as I can possibly be, that's courageous. And to step into my truth, that's courageous.
Yeah, because I do feel like we've been talking a lot about like making conscious choices, but that can only come not necessarily in the life and death sense of courage. I agree, but there's a lot of things that you're actually quite scared of kind of facing that keeping you away from consciousness in a way. So I think courage is interesting because we don't really practice courage that often, as you say. We live in a very, very safe environment, even though we're all kind of convinced that it's more dangerous than ever. Like reality is that it's dangerous on the surface level because you get some angry rant on a social platform or something like that. But it's not something that I think we were confronted with so many more like truly dangerous things where you had to show courage.
It's funny that you said something that I've been thinking about too. Like, like forever I've been wondering, what do I have to do? Like,
Yeah.
What is the thing that I'm missing that I'm not facing?
Mm-hmm.
You know? So from your point of view, what is it that I'm not facing, do you think?
That you're not facing?
Yeah. What is it that I'm not facing? Because I've been wondering myself, like, what is it that I'm not dealing with?
But is it, I have no idea. We don't know each other that well, but
Yeah.
I do think like we do like to think of ourselves as the kind of hero in the journey. And whenever that kind of narrative plays out, you have to kill the dragon, right? And then what's my dragon to kill? And I do think also like in this I don't know, view of like what's a successful life, you have to find your like thing to conquer, your mountain to climb. And a lot of people are like they tried to climb a bunch of mountains and didn't feel really fulfilled from that climb. And like we're all kind of searching for that I don't know, is it I can't tell you.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Do you feel like you're doing your thing?
I'm trying to, and I'm trying to hold myself accountable to kind of figure out what that is. I think I approached my whole life very set on a goal, and what's taking courage for me right now is to be a little bit less goal oriented in like what's the specific mountain. It's Mount Everest, and this is exactly how I need to pack. And what's demanding a lot of courage for me right now is being a lot more explorative in terms of maybe I don't need to have a specific end goal in mind, but what I do know is that I want more real conversations such as this. So let's explore the podcasting thing for a while and see where, and like that gives me a lot on the journey. And I've been really bad at kind of appreciating the journey before. And maybe like, maybe the journey is the goal, right? And that's difficult because I do struggle a lot of times with like, yeah, this is an interesting journey, but is it the journey?
Yeah,
Is there a better journey out there?
definitely.
And what is actually my journey versus a journey that I've kind of idolized? Like it's doing this specific thing or having this specific title or getting these specific things into my life. And I think that it's very difficult, at least for me, to kind of find like what's the true voice of me. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
there's a lot of things that you've kind of carried around as ideas that are really difficult to get out of. But what do you think? What's kind of your
I mean,
moment?
really, you've reflected. It's so strange, when you start to open up to these kind of things, because you reflected exactly this idea. It's the same for me. It's like there are all these mountains, and I've done this and I've done that, and I play the piano and I make art and I, do talks and I, do the breathwork thing, and I'm like, I'm creative director and I'm like all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, what is the thing, that just like will fulfill all this stuff, that will. And then, and maybe it's because, because I have such intentions and such vision that I sort of think, oh, I'm not doing any of them the way that I want to.
Yeah.
Right. And then when you said that, it was like, it's exactly the same thing, right? It's a strange thing how it reflects. And for me right now, I feel that it's a lot about integration. I used to think of every, journey as the journey, and I think it's something about integrating these things and communicating this stuff. but I don't, I don't know totally, right?
Mm.
Because every time I go inside, there's just this like, yeah, what is that? You
Yeah.
know?
And it's kind of the idea around like the reward at the end of the road. I've had a few friends that have actually, for example, sold their companies and actually made a really big exit and are now financially set for life.
Mm,
And I think the reflection, with exceptions, sure, but the reflection from most of them was that I was kind of waiting for somebody to roll out the red carpet and all of a sudden my life would be great. And that's not it. It's either like, oh, wait, I'm at the top of this mountain, but there's just a bigger mountain
over
right
there.
behind it. Somebody, like, I have a Ferrari now, but somebody else has a yacht or
Yeah.
something like that. It's like, do I want to just keep on climbing mountains? Is that it? And
Mm,
what's the cost of climbing mountains? So I think integration, and that to me has been like the real difficult part of the 30s. Is like when you were younger, it was so easy to kind of say life is about this, and it's like one thing,
mm,
like it's my career, and I'm so obsessed about my career. And then you have kids, and you have a relationship, and you have friends, and you have your health, and you have your mental health, and it's like all of this needs to kind of fit into 24 hours, and it's so
mm,
difficult to prioritize. So like just the idea of the mountain is very like, well, I'm multitasking, climbing 5, 7 mountains at any one time, and I'm kind of failing at all of them because it's all done through multitasking.
yeah.
So being more integration oriented in it is probably a really good idea.
Maybe. You know, that's maybe. Because then, like, okay, so then, yeah, like, what is, like, I guess, what is like success then,
Yeah,
right? And do we really like, yeah, like, I want to say, yeah, then, okay, maybe it's just this one thing. Um, but then,
but what about the if the idea of success is the problem?
yeah, maybe it is, and we see someone that, I don't know, there are obvious examples of people who seem like so successful that it's unbelievable, like Robin Williams or something, and
Mm,
then they're just miserable. And you're
mm,
like, how could that possibly be?
yeah,
So then, and there's hundreds of those, but then there's also other people who are, doing things like exiting from big companies that you
mm,
don't really know their names, let's say, but that you're just super millionaires and they just like sitting there thinking, well, what am I doing now? I'm going to go
yeah,
play golf or
yeah,
whatever the whole time. So like, what is it that is really important to us and how do we live our lives and what's the most important thing? Is it fame or money, or I guess fame and money are the two big ones,
yeah,
accomplishments, I guess you could say, like if you're a Mount Everest climber, you have these kind of like,
yeah.
those three things.
But
And
maybe
then,
that's circling back to the idea of the masculine. I do think a huge part when I feel that the masculine is kind of integrated well and it
mm,
kind of works is the idea of a worthwhile pursuit
mm,
that I can really be on a journey where I'm doing something really whatever, but that feels worthwhile. And that goes back to the idea of it's not just worthwhile for me. There's a connection to a larger community, even if it's just my family, but ideally something bigger.
mm,
But just being on that journey and holding yourself accountable, I think very like in periods where I see friends struggling, male friends struggling, it's like they don't really have something that feels important for them. And it
right.
doesn't really matter, like if you reach your end goal or whatever. Like it's the journey
Mm,
that's I think that aligns very well with the idea of like when do I feel content as masculine. But
yeah.
the problem is like you're second guessing yourself constantly on is it the right journey?
Yeah.
Like is this the thing to pursue? At
Yeah.
least for me, like is this the journey? Is this the journey? Or maybe this is the journey, right?
Yeah. What is the journey? Yeah. You think, oh, it would be so nice if you were born like the Dalai Lama or something. It was all mapped out for you.
Yeah, exactly. You
you
don't
know,
have to choose.
yeah, you don't have to choose, right? And then, yeah. And then if you don't, or if you're like in some family of like a heritage of things, and
Mm,
then you just follow that, right?
yeah.
Those are the kind of images that come up for me. And I'm like, I'm forging my own way. I don't know.
Mm.
I feel like sometimes when I've talked to people, I'm like, maybe I'm created this kind of Pippi Longstreet life. Like, my place, I got like, this happening over here and this kind of crazy thing over there. And it's like all bits and pieces.
Yeah.
And is it good?
Yeah. And we have this idea of that free will is only positive.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of anxiety connected to free will as well. I read this fascinating study in Sweden where obviously culturally we feel that, for example, arranged marriages are something very negative.
Yeah.
But when you look into, I follow this guy from Harvard, Arthur Brooks, who's a professor in like happiness. And I think he published a study that happiness in arranged marriages are actually on average higher than on average, and obviously there are really bad things happening as well as in normal marriages as well.
The decision is taken out of it.
The decision is taken out of it.
Yeah.
And there are also other contexts that are considered that you're not really thinking about when you're just crazily in love with a person when you're 24, right? There's like, matches in terms of family and the broader community around it. And we kind of know that this person comes from a stable home or whatever. Like if you were to match your son with somebody else, you would consider things that as a consequence of you knowing more about life.
Yeah.
But when you choose your life partner, especially if you do it in the beginning, in your 20s, like you haven't really seen that much about life. And we have divorce rates around 50% and whatever it might be. So like there's a couple of, I think, like we're kind of obsessed with the idea of free will is always positive. But I do think there's a lot of anxiety connected to, because you could always do something else, almost like the Tinder economy of life. Like, there's just another guy to date, or there's another job to take, there's another mountain to climb, whatever.
Yeah, this is Dan Gilbert, where he talks about the decision thing. I'm not sure if you've seen this TED Talk or whatever. Interesting. I'll send you the link for that. But you know what, just to get, because I think that's interesting also about happiness, because you mentioned Arthur Brooks. And what's strange is in this week, I listened to an Arthur Brooks podcast, right?
All right, yeah.
Another person 3 days at the Breathwork session on Sunday mentioned to me that she was going to go to see the Dalai Lama, because he goes and sees the Dalai Lama and all this kind of stuff. She took his course or something.
Yeah.
And now you mentioned him again. And it's all within this week, right? And then I started thinking right now, just like when you were just finishing that thing about serendipity, right? And how somehow, like at certain, like the messages come through, right? When we're talking about where we should be focusing our attention, what we should be doing. And there's something in that, right? There's something about this idea of happiness, this Arthur C. Brooks, the Dalai Lama, all this kind of stuff, right? So then I'm like, okay, my scattered body, right? It's like, which mountain to climb? Maybe it's time to contact Arthur Brooks and go to the Dalai Lama trip or whatever,
Exactly.
like that, right? And then, but there's something in like there's something happening that's kind of sending us signals. And I think if we start to learn to be better at listening to that, and then also like feel into how we feel, and we can direct ourselves through the messages that come through to us in some way by listening, maybe we find that integration and connection that we are looking for. Maybe it's actually all shouting at us all the time, but we're so busy thinking, I have to do this or I have to do that, that we're never actually really there.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something like that. You think?
It's interesting, because I've been struggling as well when it comes to, now Hannah has been talking a lot about like, I want to manifest this energy, and obviously she's kind of dipped into this alternate universe, which is really fun. And we've been talking about, manifesting seems like kind of a both semi-active but mostly passive thing. And like, what's the balance of me being the actor and just me allowing and listening for like the universe to provide answers? This to me is where I'm kind of at the fringe of where like my mind is.
But the thing is you've been doing this, right, in a strange way with all the kind of, let's say, career choices. So, you're doing your thing, maybe studying, all of a sudden it's like, this looks interesting, and you get, and then an opportunity comes, and then the next opportunity. So it's been happening. and then because you're proactive, like proactive is one of the main things, because you listen and then take action, then you manifest whatever it might be. And in a sense, the feeling is when we listen to this manifestation secret thing, that it's passive, but actually the people who are successful with it are active. Right.
Of course. And I do think once you start opening up and being more allowing of alternate routes really tend to present themselves. I think for most of my life I was very locked into, this is the goal that I'm looking for, and then I could only see that goal and was frustrated when it didn't happen, and I had kind of eye shudders or whatever you call them on the side of the horse, just not looking at all of the other opportunities that were kind of available, but they weren't on the specific path that I was on. So the more, again, you can, like circling back to the beginning of this conversation, be more conscious, more aware, more present. Like you see so many more opportunities along the way, and that's really fun and creative, I suppose.
There's this story, I mean, it's not too long. There's this spiritual guy, and he thinks that, like, if God loves me, God's going to save me. So he jumps into this river, right? Have you heard this?
I read this story 2 days ago for the first time in my life.
Serendipity, right? All right.
So it's a good story.
It's exactly. It's so weird, right? Anyway,
tell the story. It's a good story.
So I'll just tell my abridged version. So jumps into the river, and he says, I'm going to drown myself, and God's going to save me, right? So he jumps in the river, boom. And, some guy comes along the side of the bank of the river and says, hey, buddy, what are you doing? Let me throw you this stick. So he throws him a stick, and the guy goes, no, God's going to save me. And so then he floats further down the river, and he's like having a harder time swimming and everything like that. And then there's these kids that are in a canoe, and they're like, you okay? You okay? And it's like, no, God's going to save me. They're like, just grab my paddle. God's going to save me. He's like, no, God's going to save me. I'm not going to grab your paddle. And he goes a little bit further along, and this whale comes along, and it swims underneath him and says, jump on my back, and I'll save you and bring you to the side of the beach. Now he's in the ocean, right? And he's drowning. And then he says, no, God's going to save me. He dies, goes up to heaven, asks God, why didn't you save me? And he said, well, who do you think, sent the person on the side of the river and sent the whale and sent these kids in the canoe, right? The message is coming. Obviously, there are different verses. I just made that one up quickly, but it's exactly the story, right? The message is, so that's manifesting too. Right.
And you have to be in a mental position to perceive the things that come along in your life as the help, in a sense.
And what's weird is that we just talked about serendipity, and you heard this for the first time 2 days ago too, right? Whoa. So those things can freak us out. We can appreciate them.
That's very cool. Thanks so much for coming, Gary. It's been awesome.
Thank you. It was really good to be here. I'm wondering what kind of serendipity happens as we move ahead.
Innan vi släpper varandra skulle jag vilja tacka dig för att du lyssnar på den här podcasten. Jag hoppas verkligen att den är relevant för dig i din roll. Om så är fallet skulle jag be dig om en tjänst. Du får gärna skicka den här podden, just det här avsnittet, till någon i ditt nätverk som du tycker vore behjälpt av att lyssna på det. Dessutom är det så att den boken jag skrev som bär samma namn som den här podden, The Execution Revolution, är en bok som på många sätt blir bara viktigare och viktigare för varje vecka, månad som går. Det vill säga förmågan att driva förändring, inte bara utsättas för den. Den är skriven som en handbok för alla er chefer i hur gör man systematiskt för att lyckas med det som är absolut viktigast för dig i din roll. Den finns där böcker finns. Tack för mig.